This includes, among many things, an investment of $15.3 million through Budget 2023 to build a publicly accessible online portal where Canadians can access the information on their exposure to flooding, and millions more to create a low-cost flood insurance program for those at high risk, identifying high-risk areas and implementing a modernized disaster financial assistance arrangement program to incentivize mitigation efforts. I met with leaders in the insurance industry and the Insurance Bureau of Canada just earlier this week. As you're probably aware, I set up a national advisory table on flood risk because there is a complexity to it. And just to sort of explain why that is necessary, there are quite a number of places in our country where people live on a flood risk plain, where they're at high risk of being flooded out. And yet that information, first of all, is not readily available to them. It's one of the reasons we're investing in flood mapping, and we are developing and will be introducing, hopefully within the next 12 to 18 months, a flood risk portal, which will enable Canadians and municipalities and communities to get real data, accurate and reliable data as to the full nature of the risk that any particular location may have with respect to flood. And in the past, many of those areas were described as being on a 100-year flood risk plain or a 300-year flood risk plain. But with climate change, those timelines are truncating very significantly, and as well, the risks are simply getting higher. And so we want to make sure Canadians have that information so that they can make good decisions. One of the challenges is that for many of those people living in a floodplain, they cannot get overland flood insurance. It's simply not available. And so we've been working very closely for the past 2 years with the insurance industry in the development of a national flood plan, insurance plan, that will enable Canadians to gain access to this. For the vast majority of those Canadians, the insurance industry is perfectly capable of doing that as long as they have the actuarial data from that flood mapping to determine the level of risk. And so we've been working very closely to create that data and make sure that it's available to them. But there are also some other locations where frankly the risk is so high and that it's very difficult for the insurance company in and of itself to provide the utility of flood insurance in those locations. And so we are also looking at a number of different ways in which the federal government can provide support and assistance to underwrite some of that risk. But it's not just simply making insurance available, if I may, it's also helping people make better decisions. And so if they know their risks, if they know the hazards of their particular location or where their home is located or the way in which it was constructed, all of those things will help people make better decisions about, and municipalities better decisions about where they locate new housing development, for example, the building codes that they implement to make them more fire resistant or flood resistant. And even some of the mitigation efforts, there are some communities and some places in Canada we can protect through diking systems and pumping stations and investments in critical infrastructure. And there are some places that are just simply too risky for us to build. And then in those cases, we have to make some difficult decisions to retreat from those places because they are too at risk. Or if people choose to be there, to accept that those risks will not be insured and not be eligible for reimbursement. And so those are important that's information that we have to make sure people have so that they can make smart decisions and do the right things.